The historical geography of Europe considers how physical geography and climate affect history. Physical geography and climate are actors in history just as much as a prime minister or a president or a peace treaty. Writing in the 1950s, Fernand Braudel, the French historian, suggested that for centuries man has been a prisoner of climate, of vegetation, of the animal population, of a particular agriculture, or a whole slowly established balance from which he cannot escape. The idea here is that physical geography and climate, to some extent, determine the way history will unfold. In your reading for this unit, Towards a Historical Geography of Europe, the geographer I.G. Symonds groups Europe into 5 general regions, A, B, C, D, or E, as seen on the map. And he groups them according to their physical geography, whether they have mountains or whether they're lowlands, according to their land use over thousands of years, what type of agriculture, what type of fishery, their climate, whether they're hot and dry or icy, snow and barren, their energy sources, whether it would be wood for fuel or coal or perhaps nuclear energy after the 1950s, and what building materials did they use to construct their houses. When historians and geographers think about the historical geography of Europe, they look at physical geography, like I've mentioned, mountains, lowlands, cliffs, coasts, rivers, the use of canals, and also climate, whether it's hot and dry or cold, icy, and barren. And one of the things that historical geographers do, historians and geographers, is look at land use and water use, but over really long periods of time, what the annals historians used to call the longue durée, or the long term. So we might even go back as far as hunter-gatherer phases, or the turn to agriculture from a more nomadic lifestyle, or just food collection. So in agriculture, what crops are grown in each region? Is it olives in the south? Wheat across the plains? Where can you grow grapes? What's the climate like? Believe it or not, at one point people used to grow grapes and make wine in Britain. Or what about the industrial phase in the 18th century? What are the sources of industry and energy at that time? Or even in the post-industrial phase, have things shifted beyond coal and steel to maybe using more nuclear energy? Or industries such as tourism, skiing in the Alps, or going to the beach along the Costa del Sol or the French Riviera. So as I've already mentioned, sources of energy play into how we use land. And the other kind of typical way of identifying different regions of Europe is through the building materials. Are the houses made of nice little thatched roofs and cottages? Are they made of stone? Is it stucco and terracotta? Are they made of lumber and wood? What's the local building material that kind of defines the architecture of the region? When we look at Europe's physical landscapes, probably the most prominent feature is the lowlands stretching all the way from Germany across France, and Denmark is included in there too, Belgium and the Netherlands, and then probably the Alps and the Carpathian chain that really begin to kind of separate Northern Europe from Southern Europe. In terms of climate, all around the Mediterranean you can see a kind of drier, warmer climate, whereas up in the north and in the Nordic regions it's much, not too surprising, much colder. And here we see the Ural Mountains, as I'm showing here with the pointer, on the eastern region that really separates Europe. This is really considered to be the dividing line between Europe and Asia. So the Ural Mountains here in the east separate Europe from Asia, and the other one that separates Europe from Asia really are the Caucasus Mountains, where the Sochi Olympics were held, one of the current trouble spots of the world. So these two really are traditionally what splits Europe from Asia on this side, and then now here roughly the Middle East. So we're going to play a game. It's called Take a Guess, which region of Europe? I'm going to show you some pictures, and you can just take a little mental guess, or speak aloud if you like. Made a country like this. It's why all the Greeks had independent city-states in the classical era. That's the idea behind this historical geography of Europe, that the geography and the climate in some ways determine or shape the history. So the Mediterranean basin then isn't just Greece and its islands. It's Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, Malta, Gozo, Spain, southern France, and Portugal's included in there too. Although it's on the Atlantic coast, culturally it fits more with a kind of a Mediterranean mid-afternoon need for a siesta. Okay, next guess. Looks quite lush. There's a sod or a turf roof, giving insulation and warmth, perhaps needed for very cold, wintry nights. And lots of wood for building materials. This is Skansen, which is an outdoor or a living museum in Stockholm, Sweden. So this is an example then from Scandinavia of the need to insulate against the cold in the winter, but having lush, hot summers. So the whole region then, Scandinavia, or alternatively the Nordic region, is Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And geographically, Denmark is actually part of the European lowlands because it's quite low-lying, but culturally it fits in with Scandinavia. Okay, next guess. Do you feel like bursting into song, perhaps? The hills are alive with the sound of music. Captain Von Trapp and Maria. Here is the Central Alps, Austria, and a national park. So you can almost hear those cowbells and begin to think of things like Lindt chocolate and Swiss chocolate. Because one of the things in Europe is that the countries are so closely crowded together, and of course mountains form a natural border between territories. So here we see in the Alps really form a border between Germany and Switzerland. So Germany here, Switzerland, Italy to the south, Austria on this side, and then more to the corner here would be Slovenia. So it's quite a few countries that have this natural border of the mountainous regions of the Alps. Here's another mountainous region, another one of those region C's. Any guesses from the stone, from the terracotta roofing tiles, from the kind of inclines? Quite dry, looks hot. This is really near the Pyrenees. About 10 minutes hike from here is well, this is the Pyrenees, but you're right in the mountainous part of the Pyrenees. And it's a couple miles hike to the border between France and Spain. So again, the mountains form a natural border between Spain and France. In these areas, and this is again a kind of a mountainous region, the Cevennes in the south of France, the locals adapt to the climate of the winter and the summer. For example, the practice of transhumance, or migrating herds of sheep, animals, to pastures so that they spend the warm summers, the hot Mediterranean summers, I should probably say, in the cooler areas of the mountains, and they spend the winters in the valleys, so it's not so cold from the altitude. So Region C then are all the Alps and mountains dotted around Europe. Again, these form the borders of Switzerland, Germany, Austria, France, Italy, I think Slovenia is left off there, or the example here of the border between Spain and France, which is formed by the Pyrenees. And you can see that in this slide. Next guess. Lots of wood, looks quite lush. These photos are actually from the early 1900s. Again, early 1900s agricultural practices. Looks fairly primitive. Early 1900s wood cutting and lumber, an important industry. And the plains, hay, wheat, the kind of market, lots of peasants. And this, of course, is Russia, and also typical of Eastern Europe, all the way to the natural border between Europe and Asia, which is the Ural Mountains. The last guess. This might look familiar. Very, very flat. These are from two different eras of history, these photos. The top photo is earlier than the second one. Very flat. Not too many distinguishing features in the background, except perhaps in the bottom one. You might recognize then the Western Front in 1918. So the top one is British Army troops, British Expeditionary Forces, near Ypres in Belgium, which is where the Menin Gate is today, where the last post is sounded every night. And that's from February 1918. And the bottom one are Canadian troops walking in the Netherlands in the Second World War, April 1945. So Belgium and the Netherlands border each other. They're both very flat, part of the Western European lowlands. And if you were a historical geographer, you might ask yourself, why did many of the actions, why was Germany able to roll across those western lowlands into Belgium, into the Netherlands, into France, in the Second World War especially? What is it about the geography that creates that kind of historical event? Why didn't we see any major action in the Alps? Germany, we just saw, and Switzerland and Austria are right beside each other in the Alps. They share borders. But neither the First World War nor the Second World War saw any action there. So in what ways does physical geography shape history? So that was an example then from Western Europe, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, France, and remember we include Denmark in that, although culturally it's part of Scandinavia. So the exercise for this unit is to look at some videos produced by the European Environmental Agency. And this is a screenshot of a map of Europe with the yellow dots showing you where some of these videos are from. There's a playlist of 17 videos on YouTube. It's also on Vimeo, and there's 6 of them have been chosen to be placed in the unit of our online course. So I chose these 6 because I would like you to contrast 2 regions of Europe and watch 2 of these Environmental Atlas of Europe videos about these regions. So the Netherlands, the video is called Floating Cities, and it's about how the Netherlands are actually below sea level. below the land and the ways in which the Netherlands cope with that type of impending natural disaster or flood, or the recurring floods that it has experienced over the centuries. The second one is on southern Spain and growing cork. It also talks about transhumance and the migration of animals. And it tells you a little bit about the Mediterranean climate. The one on Finland, called Rain on Snow, is about reindeer herders in the north. There's another one on northern Spain, really about Catalonia, called The Ecology of Wine, and it's about kind of a more natural ways of producing wine. But again, it's close to the Pyrenees, close to the border with France. There's a fifth one that focuses on the border between eastern France and western Germany and looks at a national park which is very heavily forested. And the sixth one is on Eastern Europe, on Poland or Belarus, about, again, a really important forest there that's been important since the early modern era. So as you watch these or choose these videos, I want you to think about, how does physical geography and climate affect how people live on the land? And I'd also like you to think about how physical geography and climate might affect history.